All right. Hello. Welcome to Afternoon Art Club. My name is Miss Kim. I am the curator of education at the Florence County Museum, and that's just a fancy name for a teacher that works at the museum. I'm going to be talking with you guys today about clay, and we're going to be learning about a specific group of people who use clay to create artwork. So we're going to be talking about the Catawba Native American tribe today. Before we get started, though, I want to go over just a couple of things with you so that you know, for those of you who are new, or for those of you who have done Afternoon Art Club before, just to help you as a refresher, remember how we manage our Afternoon Art Club on Zoom. So right now I have everyone muted, and the reason I do that is because the recording will only record the person who's talking, which is me right now. And I want to make sure that your names and faces do not end up on the recording because we do post that recording to YouTube. And I want to make sure that your privacy is protected. And so I have everyone muted while I'm recording. And then there will be times where I pause the recording or stop the recording and give you guys an opportunity to talk. But if you have a question before I do that, if you look down at the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll see kind of right in the middle a little icon that looks like a text bubble, and it says chat. If you click on that, you will see the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can type any questions that you have right in that chat box. And I can see those as you're typing, and I can answer those questions as you go along. So I'm just going to say hi to everybody in the chat box. If you'll go over to your chat box and say hi back to me, that way I know everybody knows how to use the chat box. That would be awesome. All right, it looks like I'm seeing some hellos. All right, very good. So everybody, it looks like just about, okay. It looks like, yep, I got everybody. Everybody has found the chat box. Awesome. So if you have any questions, just throw your questions right in the chat box as we're talking. And then if you have questions that you want to ask with your voice, then you can do that at the end of our session or anytime I pause it and tell you it's safe for you to do that. So I'll make sure to let you know when those times are upcoming. Okay, so we've gone over that. Let me see, I have a list, make sure I've gone over everything. Oh, right. So right now, again, I have everybody muted, but when you're able to unmute yourself down in the bottom of your window where that chat bar was, all the way to the left is the mute and unmute button. It's not going to let you unmute yourself right now, but when I choose that on my screen, it will let you mute or unmute yourself just by clicking on that little microphone icon. So just so everybody knows how to operate the Zoom screen, because I know that may be new for some of you, that's how we go about it. All right, and I am recording now, and these recordings do get posted to our YouTube channel, and this video recording will be posted starting tomorrow, and it will stay on our YouTube channel for the entire winter session. So if I talk about something today and maybe you don't have your supplies or materials ready, or you have a question about what I've done, or you just want to watch it again, then you can watch this on our YouTube channel starting tomorrow, and I'll send a link to everyone to that video. So that'll be there for you tomorrow. And last but not least, before we get started, I just want to go over our ground rules. So we do have a couple of simple ground rules for Afternoon Art Club. The first one is to be kind. There are going to be times in Art Club this session where you're going to have the opportunity to look at some of the other participants' artwork and to maybe talk about their artwork, to tell them things that you like about their artwork, maybe tell them something that they might have been able to improve upon in their artwork. But I want us to make sure that we're always being kind and using kind language with each other. So please keep that in mind throughout the entire winter session of Afternoon Art Club. And last, please be respectful. Sometimes we have technical difficulties or things that aren't going quite exactly right with our afternoon art club session. That's just the way the internet works. But please, if you have a question or you need some help, you can ask that right in the chat box and I'll do my best to help you. So please be kind and be respectful. And if you can follow those simple rules, we're going to have a great winter session in afternoon art club. All right, so let's get started with our lesson for this week. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. I do have a PowerPoint we're going to start with today, and we're going to talk a little bit about Catawba Pottery. So I'm going to go ahead and get that up. Again, don't forget, if you have a question, then please, please, please just throw your question in the chat box. I'll be watching it all the time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can see our PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to go ahead and share. And I'm going to go back and pull up our chat box as well, just to make sure that I'm keeping an eye on that. One moment. Okay, I've got that ready. All right. So guys, we are going to be working with clay starting today. So if you have picked up a kit from the Florence County Museum, you probably have a hunk of clay that looks something like this. And if you are supplying your own supplies, then you might have clay that's white or kind of a yellowy color, or any color at all is totally fine. This is an air dry clay, which means it does not have to be fired or heated to become hard and permanent. And we're going to talk a little bit more about exactly what that means. Now, if you have not picked up your kit from the Florence County Museum, if you haven't been able to get it yet, or if you don't have clay and you can't find any, please send me an email, because I can, even if you have the rest of the supplies and you just need clay, I can package this clay up for you and you can swing by and get it and then follow along with the video to make what we're making. So we are going to be talking more about the supplies in a minute. All right, hold on just a second. We have someone else joining us. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and get started talking about Catawba pottery. Now, the Catawba are, I'm going to actually go ahead and go forward. And we are going to be making coil pots in the style of the Catawba. So that's why you see that there. All right. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the Catawba are South Carolina's only federally recognized Native American tribe in South Carolina. Now, that's kind of a mouthful, but what that means basically is that the Catawba have received recognition from the federal government, and they have a reservation, which is an area of land where their tribe can continue to practice their different cultural practices. So the Catawba's reservation is located in York County, South Carolina. Now, we are going to be looking at some examples of Catawba pottery today. I'm going to show you some examples from the museum's collection. So you're going to kind of get to see the kind of work that they made. And then we're going to make a clay pot in the same way that the Catawba still make pots today. So the Catawba Native Americans have a rich history of creating with clay, and they use riverbed clay, which is clay that they've dug up from the ground near the riverbed. They use riverbed clay that they've dug and kind of cleaned and prepared to make pottery. They use a type of construction called coil construction, and we're going to be using that same process. So we're going to be talking about that as well. And they use a process called pit firing, which is really cool. We're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. So all these things, the riverbed clay, the coil construction, and the pit firing process are all used to create Catawba pottery. Now, those techniques have been passed down from generation to generation for more than 4,000 years. So when we say the Catawba have a long history of pottery making, we're talking thousands of years of these Catawba Native Americans creating pots. So let's look at one of them. We talked about them some, but let's take a look. All right, So let's take a look at this piece of pottery. I'm gonna move my chat box over so I can see. There we go. All right, so this image on your screen is a piece of Catawba pottery. It's called a black snake pot or a double black snake pot. It has been pit fired, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. And it was made in the early 20th century. So the early 1900s is probably when this pot was made. Now, the double black snake pot is one of the most sought after Catawba pots that are created. And that's because the black snake is a symbol of leadership and respect in the Catawba Tribe. So these pots are very, very special. They're only given to people who hold leadership positions or who have great respect amongst their tribe members. Now, I want you to think for just a moment as you look at this pot, because I'm going to answer some of these questions for you throughout our lesson today. But I want you to take a look at the pot and think about the following questions. So just take a good look at the pot for a moment. Just take a moment and let your eyes sort of go all the way around the pot. Look at all the details, the different colors and textures that you can see. And I want you to think about, how do you think that the Catawba attached those double black snakes to the pot? How do you think they might have made those stick to the pot so that they don't just fall off? Just think about it for a moment. These are all questions we're going to answer in our lesson, but I want you to think about them before we answer them. Okay, how do you think the Catawba might have added the different colors that you see on this pot? How do you think they added those colors? There's lots of ways to add color to pottery. What method do you think that the Catawba might use for this? One second, we've got someone joining us. I'm trying to let them in. Okay, so what method do you think they might have used for that? All right, good. So we had someone answer in the chat box. They think they could have used different types of clay. That's a good guess. Bryson, that's a very good guess. So let's see what else. How do you think that how do you think the Catawba added shine to this pot? You can see right here on the screen that this looks the surface of this looks a little bit shiny. You can see the shiny surface there. How do you think that they added that shiny surface? So all of these are questions that we're going to be answering in today's lesson. So I just want you to think a little bit about that as we get started. All right, so let's move ahead. And we're going to talk about, first of all, one of the first questions I asked you, I'm going to back up, is how you think these black snakes might have been attached to the pot. And here is the answer. The way that the Catawba build pots is using something called coil construction. And that means they roll out long, kind of snake-like pieces of clay. I want you to think about maybe if you've ever used Play-Doh before and you've rolled out maybe a long snake of clay. That's kind of like a coil. And I'm going to show you today how you can make coils, but I do want you to keep that in mind, that that's how they made coils. And to attach coils together, they had to do a couple of things. So, or actually 3 steps. So the first step was to score both pieces of clay. And they did that by creating some scratches in the surface of the clay. Where those 2 pieces would meet together, they would create scratches in the surface of the clay. And when they would push those pieces of clay together, those scratches kind of join together, kind of like my fingers are doing, if you can see my face. They join together and it kind of gives it something to hold on to. So step number 1 was scoring. Step number 2 is to use slip. Slip is kind of like clay glue, for example. It's kind of a sticky thing that holds clay together. And all you need to create slip is clay and water. So you will be adding just a little bit of water to the surface of your clay and really rubbing it in to create some sticky slip to hold it together. And then the third step is to seam the two pieces of clay together. And to do that, all you need to do is press the two pieces of clay together firmly to create a secure connection. Then you can either smooth out the clay or not. And I'm going to demonstrate all this for you, but I did want to go over it with you first so you kind of knew what I was talking about. Okay, so those are the ways that we attach clay together. Now, if we go back again, I'm sorry, I'm flipping around a lot today. How do you think the Catawba added color to this pot? If you look at this image, you can see all the color that is on this pot. Let me go back. Now, if you take a look at this pot, you'll see the different colors on the surface of the pot. And this was achieved by something called pit firing. So we did have someone say that maybe by using different types of clay or by using pigment, maybe like a glaze or a paint, they might have gotten those different colors. But that's actually not how they got them. Those colors came through pit firing. Now, the Catawba used a pit firing process to turn that soft, wet clay into a pot that was hard and permanent. The pots were left out in the sun to dry. So once they'd made their pot, they'd set it out in the sun to dry. Then they would dig a big hole called a pit, and they would build a fire inside that pit. The pots that were dried in the sun were set by the fire to warm up slowly, and eventually those pots would be moved into the fire to completely harden. Now, as they did this, the minerals from the earth, so the minerals from the dirt and the smoke of the fire would soak into the pot to create all the beautiful colors. If you look at the pots that are in this fire, you can see what I'm talking about. We can see some red kind of colors that might have come from iron in the soil, for example. Or we can see some black, which might have come from smoke. All right, so this pit firing process is how the clay was colored in the image that we saw. Now, how did the clay get that beautiful shine? One of the ways that the Catawba would create shine on their pots was not by painting glaze on the surface or like a shiny paint. They would use a technique called burnishing. Burnishing is a way of smoothing the surface of the clay to make it shiny. You can see in this image, this person is using a smooth rock. This is just a smooth stone, and they're rubbing it on the surface of the clay to burnish the clay, which creates this really lovely, shiny surface. So to burnish the clay, we're going to wait till the clay is almost dry, but not quite. And then we're going to use either the back of a spoon or a smooth stone to carefully rub the surface of the clay until it begins to shine. And we're going to be doing that together next time we meet. So burnishing the clay is something that we're going to be working on together. Now, some things to think about as you go throughout this week, and I'm going to do a demonstration for you after this, but these are some thoughts that I want you to kind of keep in your mind, and we'll review them at the end today as well. As you're working with clay this week, I want you to think about how working with clay is different than you thought it would be. So think about what you think it's going to be like to work with this clay. And then after you've made your project, I want you to think about how this is different than you thought it might be. Then I want you to think about, why do you think the Catawba used riverbed clay? Why wouldn't they use some other type of clay? I went to the store and bought this clay. Why wouldn't they do something like that? Why go down to the river and dig up clay? And then lastly, I want you to think about when the, hold on one second. Okay. Oops, hold on one second. I sent that to the wrong person. I'm answering a question, one moment. All right, so when I want you to think about how when the Catawba used the pit firing process to make their pots hard and permanent, how is that going to be different than what we're going to be doing? Because we're not going to be building a fire or putting this in any kind of heat source. So I want you to be thinking about how what we're going to do is different. And then at the end, how the results are different. So that is what we're going to be working on over the next few weeks. Now I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint here and come back to everyone. So I'm going to switch to sharing my desktop screen so that we can go over a few things that we're going to be working on together. My setup is a little bit different today than normal, so just bear with me. I'm trying to make sure that we're able to make this all work. But again, as you have questions, don't forget to put them in the chat box and I'll answer them as we go. And then at the end, I'll give you an opportunity to answer the questions out loud. Okay, excuse me. Whew. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop screen with you. Let's make sure we can get this working here. There it is. All right. So I'm going to turn some things a little so that you can see me and the screen. All right, guys. So as we, I bumped it. Sorry, I bumped my table. As we get started, you're going to need to gather a few materials. Now, if you're working along with me today, that's perfectly fine. Or if you're watching this and you're going to do this project later on your own, that's fine too. Again, this is going to be on YouTube, so you can watch this and work at this a little bit later. Let me go ahead and open that chat screen. One moment. All right. Hold on one second. Okay. All right. I'm just answering a question. One second. Okay. All right, guys. So if you picked up clay from us that came in a package like this, and again, we do have a bunch of people who haven't picked up their kits yet. So if you haven't picked up a kit, it'll be there for you when you get it. And I want to show you. So the only thing you're going to need from your kit is this right here. So you'll have one thing of clay. I have a couple here just to kind of show you with today. And then you might want to gather a few other materials from around your house. So let me show you what is going to be useful for you to gather. You're going to need something to score the clay with. Now, if you'll remember, I told you that scoring is something that we do to create. I'm going to lock the focus here, sorry, so it doesn't keep doing that. Okay, it shouldn't wiggle. The screen shouldn't wiggle around on this now. Okay. Well, there we go. Okay. Now, so I'm going to be using a toothpick. That's something that I have around the house. If you do not have a toothpick or that's not something that you have access to, there are a lot of other things you could use. You could use the tip of a pencil. So just any old pencil, the tip of it to score the clay. You could also just use a fork. And forks are actually pretty quick to use because they have 4 little scratchers rather than just the one point of the pencil or the toothpick. So that's very handy. So any of these would work. Clay is basically just a kind of mud. There's nothing toxic in clay, so you don't have to be worried about using a fork that you would normally use in your house. But if you had a plastic fork, for example, that would work well too. So a fork or a pencil with a point or a toothpick. Any of those would work well for scoring. To create slip, you're going to need a little bit of water. So I don't know if you remember, but I told you that slip is a mixture between clay and water. So in order to create slip, you're going to need a little bit of water. You'll notice I don't have a lot of water here. It's just a little tiny bit in a bowl. And that will be more than enough water for the either the back of a spoon. So this is just a regular spoon, and the back of it is nice and whoops, hold on, I'm having a little bit of my internet. All right, so the back of your spoon is something that you might need, or a smooth stone. In the image that I showed you, they used a smooth stone. So if you can find, maybe that might be fun to do over the next couple of weeks, go on a hunt for a nice smooth stone that you could use for burnishing. So all of these are materials that you might need. These you don't need today. These will be for next week, but just something to, just wanted to show you what you might need. The only other thing you're going to need is some plastic. Now, this is just an old plastic bag that I got from a store. So like a grocery store bag would work just fine. Or you could use saran wrap from the kitchen, any little piece of plastic that you can find. We are going to be wrapping up our clay pot in plastic. The plastic that this comes in might be a little bit too small. So we're going to be wrapping up our clay pot in some plastic when we're finished so that it dries really slowly. And that'll help us be able to burnish it next time. So I'm working on a white sheet of paper here. You don't have to work on any kind of fancy paper. You can just get a sheet of paper from your art kit if you have one, but you could also use some newspaper, just anything to protect the surface of your table, because clay can get kind of messy. Remember, clay is basically mud. So it definitely can get a little bit messy. I want to make sure. 1 second, just trying to make sure all my things are here. Okay. All right. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I had my chat box visible for you guys. Okay, so here's my clay. Now, when you first get your clay out, I recommend just kind of pulling off a chunk of it. This is maybe too much to kind of handle all at one time, but just pull off a little bit of your clay and work it in your hands. It's always good to get a feel for the materials that you're using before you start using them. Now, one thing you might notice is that when you start to use your clay on your table, your paper might wiggle around. I got some pieces of tape out just for that problem for myself. So you can always tape down your paper to help make that a little easier. All right, so I just like to kind of roll it around in my hands a little bit so that I know what my clay feels like and kind of get used to what it feels like. Now, I want to show you how to do a couple of things today with your clay. The type of clay pot that you make is going to be 100% up to you, but before you make your clay pot, there are some things you do need to know. The first thing you're going to need is a base to your clay pot. And I'm going to do that with just a piece of clay that's about the size of a golf ball. So something about the size of a golf ball or a ping pong ball is what I need. And I'm just going to go ahead and start rolling this into a ball. I can roll it on my paper, just like this. I can roll it on my paper. Okay, or I can roll it in my hands like that. So whatever way, I come up with a ball. All right. So once I have my ball together, I'm going to take the palm of my hand. You can see my hands are messy from working with clay. It'll wash right off. Don't worry. I'm going to take the palm of my hand. I'm not going to use my fingertips, just the palm of my hand. And I'm going to flatten it. I'm going to flatten the clay until it's kind of like a clay pancake. Now, I don't want this to be really, really thin because that would make my clay pot really weak. So I want it to be something, trying to get it in the screen, something kind of like that. Maybe a little bit thinner than my finger, for example. Maybe about the same thickness as my pinky finger. Maybe around 1/2 inch, okay? So this is gonna be the base of my pot. Now I have a bottom to my pot, and I'm just gonna set that to the side. Okay, the next step is gonna be to roll out coils. Now the Catawba use a coil construction, which means they roll out long coils of clay and connect them to build up the sides of their pot. So I'm gonna go ahead and start rolling a coil, and I just need a little clump of clay to do that. And I'm just gonna start it with one hand, just kind of rolling it into a long piece of clay. And once I get it a little bit like this, I'm gonna start rolling out a coil. Now, this is really important. When we're rolling coils, you might want to roll back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. The problem with that is if you do that, you're gonna end up with a flat coil. And we don't want flat coils, we want nice round coils. So let me show you how we get them. You're gonna take your clay on your paper, and I like to start near the bottom of my paper, okay? Then I'm going to roll my, my coil up to the top of my paper. I'm not rolling it back and forth. I'm not going back and forth. I'm just rolling it in one direction. And as I'm doing that, I'm starting with my hands close together, and I'm moving my hands outward like that, starting with them close together and moving them outward as it rolls. And that makes my coil longer and longer. And you'll also notice my hands are not in the center all the time. I move my hands to where the thickest part of the clay is so that I can roll a nice even coil. So I'm rolling out this coil into a nice long piece of clay. I'm trying to make sure the clay is nice and even. And I want this again to be about the thickness of my pinky finger. So you can see right there, about the same thickness as my pinky finger. And there we go. We have one beautiful coil of clay and our clay base. Now it's time to start attaching clay to clay, all right? And we went over this in the PowerPoint. There are 3 steps. Step 1 is to score. Now, we want to score anywhere these 2 pieces of clay are going to touch. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit on my screen here so that you can see that a little better. Okay. Now, anywhere these 2 pieces of clay are going to touch, we want to score. So there's no reason for me to make scratch marks in the middle of my clay. I only need to make it around the edge because that's where I'm going to put this coil. So I'm going to start scoring. Now, scoring does not have to be beautiful or pretty. It just needs to be little marks in the clay like that. Now, I told you I'm using a toothpick here, but let's say you don't have a toothpick. You could use a fork or a plastic fork. Look at that. You get a bunch of marks all at once. That's pretty quick to use a fork. Make pretty quick work of scoring. You can do 4 score marks at a time. Or if all you have is a pencil, that works just fine too. Look at that. I can make score marks with my pencil as well. So you'll notice that I've scored all the way around the outside of my piece of clay here, just like that. And so that's my first step, is scoring. Now, I can also score my, my coil so that they both have those little marks on them. So I could use my fork, I could use my toothpick. And again, these don't have to be beautiful because you're not even going to see them. This just helps the clay stick together. It gives it some little teeth to grab onto, basically. Okay, so I've just made some scores. down the length of my, hold on one second, I'm going to try to focus this a little better for you. Let's see. Okay. Oh, I bumped it. Okay, I think this is a little better. All right, so now we've scored around our clay and on our coil, and now we're going to use slip. Now remember, we are going to go very easy on the water. It's very easy to get too much. So let me show you what we do. I use one finger to create slip. I'm going to take my finger, dip it into the water one time, one finger, one time, dip it into the water and rub the water on the clay until the shine goes away. That's a little saying I say to myself to help myself remember how long to keep rubbing that water on the clay. It starts out kind of shiny, and then as I'm rubbing it, it gets less and less shiny. And when it's not shiny anymore, that means I'm ready. That means I've made slip or clay glue. I'm gonna back it up a little. Okay, very good. All right, sorry for the wiggling today. My table is not as stable as usual. Okay, so now that I've created some clay glue or slip on my surface, I'm gonna start adding my coil. And I'm just gonna add that all the way around. And when I get to where the two pieces meet, I'm just gonna pinch that off, just like that, okay? Now, the third step, our first step was score, our second was slip, and our third was seam. Hold on one second. I have a question, I think, but I'm having trouble getting to it. One second. All right, okie dokie. Okay, so at the very end today, I will be happy to let you guys voice questions. I know some of you have questions, but I don't turn on the sound because I don't want to catch anybody else's face or voice in the recording. So just hang tight with me for a minute and I'll let you ask your question in that way. All right, so once you press this down, once you press that down, then you can either, so this is called seaming. We just press the two together. Now they're really well stuck. Once they're seamed, you can do one of two things. You can either rub these two together, kind of like this. And I just use my thumb for that, rubbing these pieces of clay together. You can see, you can just kind of smooth them out to create a nice solid piece of clay. Or you can leave them so that you can still see the coils. And some people like to see the coils and some people don't. So that's completely up to you. Some people like to see them and some people don't. Okay, so I'm just gonna do this really quickly. And you can keep smoothing it until it's nice and smooth. Now, the next step is just to keep adding coils on and on and on. Now, I do want to show you one other thing about how we add coils before we're done today. We're kind of nearing the end of what we're going to be talking about today. When I add my next coil, I have to do exactly the same thing as before. I have to score. So I have to go around and score. And I have to add slip. And then I have to press it in to seam it. So I have to do that every time. I already scored this one. So I've already scored. Now I'm gonna use one finger in the water and go all the way around. Rub the water on the clay till the shine goes away. Just like that. Once it's not shiny anymore, I can add my clay. Now, here's what I wanted to tell you. Think about the shape you want your clay pot to be. If you want your clay pot, I'm going to use my pencil here to draw it so you can kind of see what I mean. If you want your clay pot, here's the base of your pot right here. If you want your pot to go something like this, if you want it to come out and then maybe back in, then you have to stack your coils so that you create that shape. So every time you put a coil on, you would put it not exactly on top, but a little bit outside. You see that? So that this one would start to create that shape going outward. You can see how that's happening right there. If you wanted your pot, if you wanted your pot to come in kind of like that, then instead of putting it right on top, you would bring it inside a little, and you can see that's already starting to go inward. So depending on how you place your coils, that's going to determine the shape of your pot. And if you want your pot to go straight up and down like this, then you'd put the coil directly on top. And you can change. Every coil can either go out or in to change the shape of your pot. And so you're just going to keep doing that. You're going to score, you're going to slip, and then you're going to seam by pressing the clay into the coil before it. You can just pinch it off when you get there. Really make sure you've pressed it down well. I'm not pinching. Never, never pinch it, because that will make the sides very weak and thin. I'm just pressing it down so that they stick together. And then if I want to seam these together, I can just rub that down with my thumb. You can see that. Okay? And so you can see it's starting to go outward a little bit. And every time I add another coil, if I do that, I'm going to end up with something that gets a little wider. Now I can also seam it on the inside if I want to, but I don't have to. You can leave the coils exposed on the inside or on the outside. But remember, don't pinch the sides of your pot. Now your job this week is to build your pot. In fact, by the next time we meet, so not next Tuesday, but the following Tuesday, I want you to have your pot all the way built. So you have 2 weeks to work on this and to build your pot. Now, one other thing I want to tell you, clay can dry pretty quickly. I'm actually going to go ahead and stop sharing this so you can see my face. Okay, clay can dry quickly. So we do need to do some things to our clay if we want to stop working on it and then start working on it again later. So here's what we do. Make sure to put any clay that you have not used back in your plastic Ziploc baggie and seal it up. That's number one. Make sure that you've done that. Number two, if you want your clay pot to stay nice and moist so that you can keep adding coils to it, which I definitely want mine to stay nice and moist, then I can get a damp paper towel, not dripping wet, but just a paper towel with some water that's been squeezed out really well. And I can wrap it up in my paper towel. Whoops. I can wrap it up in a damp paper towel and then put it inside of a plastic bag like this. And make sure that there's no air getting into it. And next time I go to work on it, it will still be nice and soft. When I'm all the way finished with it, when I'm done working on my clay pot, I don't need the damp paper towel anymore. When I'm done working on my clay pot, I want to put it in that plastic bag and kind of loosely wrap it up, not very tight, just a loose wrap. And that will make it dry very, very slowly so that next time when we're together, we can burnish our pots. They won't be all the way dry, but they'll be very nearly dry. And that's exactly what we want. That's something called leather hard. And so when our clay is leather hard, that's exactly when we want to start burnishing. And we'll talk about that a little bit next time. So in just a moment, I'm going to stop the recording. So if you do have a question, you're going to be able to ask that. So just to remember for next time, go ahead, make your clay pot. If you still have a kit to pick up from the museum, those will be available all week, all the rest of this week and through the weekend. You're welcome to pick those up at the museum. And go ahead and build your pot using those techniques that we talked about. The recording for this video will be posted by tomorrow at noon. So if you need to watch it over to make sure that you understand all the steps, then you can do that. I thank you guys for watching. I'm going to stop the recording and then stick around here if you have any questions that you want to ask if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question. Otherwise, I will see you guys on January the 26th. That's Tuesday, January the 26th. I'll see you here for session 2. I hope you had a great time at Afternoon Art Club, and I will see you guys in 2 weeks.